Jasmine, a 16-year-old black girl from Atlanta, watched quietly through the airplane window as the morning sun spread across the runway at Hartsfield-Jackson. This was her first time flying alone, and while her nerves were real, she kept her head high, clutching her worn-out backpack close to her chest. That backpack had been with her on so many days, through school projects and competitions, walks to the library, the afternoons spent helping her cousins with their homework. It was more than just a bag. It was proof of all the little victories and tough days that brought her to this exact seat. Her heart pounded with a mix of excitement and nerves as she looked around the first-class cabin. It all felt so different from what she was used to. Passengers in crisp suits checking their phones, the quiet hum of polite conversation, the scent of expensive perfume and freshly brewed coffee drifting in the air. Every detail signaled that this was a space meant for people used to being comfortable somewhere up above the clouds. Still, Jasmine sat steady. None of this was handed to her by chance. Her aunt and godmother, Carol, who worked night shifts and never let Jasmine give up on herself, had saved up for this ticket. It was her gift and a clear sign of how much Carol believed in her. Without Carol, Jasmine probably wouldn't be here at all, not after everything their family had been through. She was on her way to Boston, where she would join a special science summer camp, something she had been dreaming about since the start of the year. Getting into the program took months of late-night study sessions, missed parties, and more than a few setbacks. Sitting there, Jasmine could almost see a path made up of all those hard days, all leading here. For a moment, she let herself enjoy just being a regular girl with a big smile and proud eyes, unconcerned with the small talk or curious glances directed her way. She didn't realize that everything was about to change. The calm, the promise of a new beginning, the freshness of the boarding. Within minutes, it would all be tested by something she could never have imagined, something that would force her to find out what she was really made of. The aisle was suddenly filled with the sharp, steady click of high heels. Everyone in first class seemed to notice. The flight attendants straightened up, and a few passengers tucked their phones away, sensing something important was coming. It was Michelle, the chief flight attendant, known on this route for her neat hair, ironed uniform, and that professional smile she wore almost like a badge. Her voice always filled the cabin, calm but with an edge that told everyone she was the boss. As Michelle made her way down the row, her practiced smile faltered for just a second the moment she caught sight of Jasmine. Every detail of Jasmine's look seemed to catch Michelle off guard. The girl in seat 2A wore a simple grey hoodie, jeans, and those sneakers worn thin at the toes. She didn't have a designer bag or even one of those neat roll-on suitcases. For a long moment, Michelle hesitated, her eyes flicking from Jasmine's backpack to her face, searching for a clue that might explain her presence. Before asking for a ticket or checking anything, Michelle's tone turned sharp. She spoke loudly enough for the whole front cabin to hear, questioning why Jasmine was sitting there. She asked if the girl was sure she was in the right seat, her words echoing off the leather headrests and making every nearby passenger glance up from their early morning routines. A hush fell over the first-class section. The businessmen who'd just been absorbed in their spreadsheets looked away. A couple in the front row exchanged glances, but said nothing. There were even a few whispers from the row behind, short, brittle phrases that Jasmine couldn't quite pick out, but she knew they were about her. The invisible fence of judgment settled around her instantly, making her feel both very conspicuous and completely alone. Jasmine's fingers tightened around the straps of her backpack. She had faced plenty of doubters before, teachers who said she aimed too high, classmates who wondered out loud if she would really make it. But rarely had their skepticism been so public, so immediate, and so heavy. What hurt wasn't just Michelle's challenge, but the collective silence from the others, their unwillingness to meet her eyes, as if her presence was a problem that didn't concern them. Without meaning to, she felt her back straighten and her head lift a little higher, silently promising herself that she wasn't about to shrink away, not after coming all this way. Michelle's voice grew cold, and without hesitating, she stood in front of Jasmine and told her to stand up and leave the seat. It wasn't a question. There was no room for doubt or for Jasmine to argue her side. The words dropped in the middle of the silent cabin like a judge, leveling a sentence, the kind of tone that said discussion was pointless and justice had already been decided. The other passengers avoided looking at Jasmine, pretending to be absorbed in their papers, screens, or the view outside. The hiss of the air vents and the shuffling of boarding continued, but now the aisle felt charged with something heavy, something invisible that pressed down on Jasmine's shoulders. Not one person spoke up or even made a sound to suggest the order was unfair. It was easier for them, it seemed, to just let it happen and blend back into their own lives. Jasmine froze for half a second. She could already imagine how this might play out if she argued back. Her experience had taught her about these moments, how fast things could turn if she was labeled as the angry black girl or as someone causing a scene. No one seemed interested in hearing her explain that her Aunt Carol had bought this ticket with care, or about all those nights spent studying so she could earn her spot here. In the cold gaze of Michelle and in the quiet agreement of the cabin, it felt like none of that mattered. She knew that if she made a fuss, it might only confirm whatever doubts people had already formed about her. Dignity, she decided in that instant, didn't always mean fighting back with words. Sometimes it meant holding your head up and refusing to collapse in front of people who expected you to. So, swallowing back a cocktail of anger, sadness, and something like shame, Jasmine slid out of the plush seat. Each step down the aisle felt more public than the last, her backpack heavier against her shoulder. The whispering started up again, softer this time. She did not look for sympathy. She did not try to defend herself. Instead, she just walked, bearing the weight of everyone's silence along with her own disappointment, every footstep pressing her further into that space of isolation that comes from someone else's careless decision. As Jasmine made her way down the aisle, her head was high but her insides churned. She noticed every sideways glance from the other passengers, the curious, uncertain, or sometimes judgmental looks that said more than words ever could. Each pair of eyes she met seemed to reinforce the message that just being herself, just existing in a place people thought she didn't belong, was somehow an offense. By the time she reached her new seat in economy, it felt like she had walked a mile, each step stripping away the pride she had carried onto the plane only minutes before. The seat in economy was cramped, pressed between a couple deep in conversation, and a college kid who barely looked up from his headphones. Here, the sunlight from the windows didn't reach her, and even the view was blocked by the wing. She could feel her hope shrinking, tucked deeper inside, as the gap between first class and economy felt like more than just a few rows. It was the distance of a lifetime, shaped by other people's decisions and old patterns that never seemed to break. It wasn't lost on her that this moment was about much more than a seat on a plane. It was a small echo of everything her mom and aunt had told her about, stories that stretched back for generations. Jasmine took a slow breath, holding back the urge to cry or let her anger spill out. Instead, she let herself sit with the feeling, a thick heaviness settling on her chest, mixed with something stronger, a kind of stubborn spark that refused to be crushed. In her hand, her phone buzzed quietly, her only real connection to the outside world now. She pulled it out, her fingers still trembling, and without drawing attention, typed a short message to Carol. They moved me to economy. Said nothing, just did it. I'm okay, but it was rough. She hadn't meant the message to be a big thing, just something to get it off her chest, a way to let Carol know the truth before she could hide behind a fake smile later. What Jasmine didn't know was that her honest words, sent without drama or complaint, would be the first domino to fall. Unintentionally, the message reached much further than she could have imagined, starting the chain that would end up challenging the quiet routines of the whole flight and eventually the entire airline. Jasmine stared at her phone screen, hardly expecting an answer so soon. But within seconds, Carol replied with a message that was simple, just 2 words: what happened? Even through text, Carol's voice was clear, firm, caring, the kind that never let Jasmine down. Seeing those words on her screen, Jasmine felt a glimmer of unexpected relief. It was just a message, but it was also a lifeline in that crowded, unfriendly space. After feeling invisible in that cabin, it felt huge to know someone saw her and believed her. No questions asked. She could almost picture Carol's face. Strong, a little tired but always alert, the same face that showed up at every parent-teacher meeting and clapped loudest at every science fair. Carol had her back even when no one else seemed to, and in that moment, that made all the difference. Jasmine let out a silent breath. The unfairness and embarrassment faded a bit. She leaned back, her message thread with Carol open on her lap, clutching it like a secret shield. It was quiet around her, headphones and old magazines filling the row with their usual distractions. Nobody nearby had any idea what was going on just rows away, or what was slowly unraveling. But Jasmine no longer felt powerless. Just knowing Carol was on her side, ready to believe without needing proof or safe answers, made Jasmine feel stronger. There was something steady building inside her, and it chased away the shame the flight attendant had tried to dump on her shoulders. Jasmine had heard enough stories from her aunt and her mum to know that sometimes all it took was one person who wouldn't let things go. She typed out the whole situation, pausing here and there to pick the right words. Short, to the point, but not shy. As soon as she hit send, she felt lighter, like she had given away part of what had weighed her down. What Jasmine didn't realize was that Carol wasn't just any godmother. Carol had a way of getting people to listen, of making a problem appear in the harshest light until someone had to do something about it. Suddenly, this was bigger than a seat or a single flight. An unfair decision, a small, quiet injustice, would find its echo, ready to shake even those who pretended not to see or care. A few seats away, Jasmine clutched her phone, not realizing how far her message would actually reach. Across the East Coast, in a modern office building in Washington, D.C., Carol sat at her big desk by the window, papers and 2 phones spread in front of her. The moment Jasmine's message came through, something shifted in Carol. She read the words carefully. Her goddaughter mistreated and humiliated, not just as a passenger, but as a young woman who had worked so hard for her chance. Carol had faced situations like this before, though usually from the other side of the conference table. She had seen too many quiet stories pushed aside, too many girls like Jasmine asked to sit down and be quiet. She had no intention of letting this end the same way. Carol did not waste time. As soon as she understood what had happened, she paused her meeting, told her assistant to clear her calendar, and made a series of quick calls, her voice cool, steady, and controlled. Carol's position at the Department of Transportation was not just a title. It meant she had real power to get things done. She knew who to call and exactly what words would make people listen. Within minutes, what started as a private moment of pain had grown into a matter of official concern. She alerted the Federal Aviation Oversight Office, flagged the airline's operations supervisor, and made sure her contact at the airport authority was tuned in. There was not a doubt in her mind. This was going to be handled at the highest level. Surprised attendants and pilots on Jasmine's flight received a sudden order: do not leave the gate, remain in position, and prepare for a federal inspection. The normal routine was thrown off balance, a sense of unease rippling through the crew. from the captain in the cockpit down to the ground crew below. Even the passengers started noticing the delay, picking up on the tension as announcements stayed vague and rushed staff moved about. Inside the aircraft, the energy subtly changed. Michelle, the chief flight attendant, and her colleagues exchanged uneasy glances. The feeling of being untouchable that had filled first class earlier now wavered as rumors spread down the aisles. Carol's quick action demonstrated that sometimes all it took was the right person, hearing the right story, to make a powerful system hit pause, shining a light on something they would rather keep in the shadows. A low, official-sounding announcement came over the cabin speakers. The flight would remain at the gate until further notice, with no extra details. The message was short and standard, but the effect was immediate. Passengers shifted in their seats, glancing at their watches or pulling out their phones, some sighing as the minutes dragged on. People started talking quietly in worried tones. A few parents tried to distract their restless children, while business travelers shot annoyed texts to colleagues about missed connections. Most thought it was just another routine delay, maybe an issue with the bags or paperwork. But as the time ticked by, the atmosphere grew tighter. Something about the delay was different this time. The flight attendants, usually quick with friendly banter and quick checks of luggage, now moved a bit stiffly down the aisles, clearly talking less and watching everyone closely. Michelle, the chief, kept checking her watch and darting tense looks between her crew and the entryway, where before she had moved with total authority, now every action seemed measured, as if she felt eyes following her every move. She tried to keep her calm, answering questions with her usual pleasant tone, but even the most distracted passenger could sense something was off. Michelle's smile came and went like a flicker, her confidence shaken by the new scrutiny. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Captain Ron Harris sat straight in his chair, headset pulled loose around his neck. He had seen his share of weather delays, maintenance hiccups, and the odd passenger who got too loud before takeoff. None of those warnings ever came wrapped in federal-level urgency and confidentiality. The dispatcher's voice in his earpiece had been firm but vague. Do not depart. Under any circumstances, stand by for federal authorities. He went over the plane's systems just to be sure. It was all routine. The plane was fine, the weather was clear, and ground crew were waiting outside as confused as everyone inside. Ron knew when something wasn't about machinery or simple logistics. When a call came through channels this direct and this urgent, the issue was almost never technical. As he watched the crew exchange nervous glances and the first-class passengers murmur complaints, he understood that this was a different kind of emergency, one centered on people, not equipment. Most on board did not have the details, but they could feel that what was happening cut deeper than a late flight or a missed meeting. Everyone waited, alert to the new tension that filled the small world of the plane, even if they could not explain exactly why. In the crowded stretch of economy, Jasmine suddenly felt a chill run down her back. It wasn't fear, not really. It was something else, almost like she could sense a shift in the air. A strange sort of awareness set in, as if her quiet action had sent out invisible ripples. She hadn't set out to make a fuss or attract attention, yet she realized that what she did, simply sending a straightforward message, was shaking the sense of security for everyone who, up until now, had been satisfied to mind their own business. She looked around and noticed how people had stopped pretending not to see her. Earlier, her walk down the aisle had seemed to swallow her whole, all judgmental looks and quick glances away. Now, the mood was different. The tension in the cabin grew, and she saw shifting faces, the sidelong looks no longer just about her, but about whatever was causing the sudden delay. It was as though the whole environment had turned on itself, uncertainty slipping into every row. She heard whispers start up, first a couple of business travelers near the front, then winding back row by row. People speculated about security checks, mechanical failures, or last-minute paperwork. The truth lingered in the background, unspoken, but present. This was not just another inconvenience. Those who had earlier ignored what happened to Jasmine now had to sit in discomfort too, forced to grapple with the unfamiliar sense that something wasn't quite right. It didn't matter that nobody had pointed straight at the problem or said out loud what had gone wrong. The atmosphere was thick, as if everyone was holding their breath, aware that there was more under the surface. Jasmine kept her eyes on her phone, but let herself listen to the hum and buzz that filled the airplane. What was once apathy had turned into a real tension, a kind of restless worry that connected everyone together whether they liked it or not. No one liked not knowing, and the longer they waited, the more the anxiety grew. Gone was the steady, pressed toward their destinations. Now, the whole flight hung in a sort of pause, suspended in the moment before things changed for good. Jasmine's quiet resistance, meant only as a confession to her godmother, had set into motion something bigger. Everyone on board was now tangled in the wait for a truth that demanded to come out, no matter how much some tried to avoid it. The minutes crawled by, the restlessness spread beyond the rows of passengers and slowly seeped into the crew. In the narrow space at the back, David, one of the younger flight attendants, found his hands fidgeting with the sleeves of his jacket. David had only been with the airline for a few years, but he loved the work, meeting people, traveling, being part of a smooth operation. Usually he respected the hierarchy and trusted his seniors, especially Michelle, their chief. She was known for her efficiency and her no-nonsense attitude. But now, David couldn't shake the odd feeling growing in his gut. Earlier, he had watched the whole thing play out. The quiet conversation, the sudden shuffle of Jasmine out of first class, the awkward glances that followed. He had followed the orders given and assumed there was a reason for it, though no one had explained. But now, after the delay and the growing questions from every side of the cabin, David's certainty faded. Alone in the galley for a moment, he whispered to Nicole, another attendant close to his age. "Did you see what happened with the girl in 28C? Doesn't feel right, does it?" Nicole shook her head, her eyebrows drawn together with concern. "No idea what's going on. But I heard Michelle on the phone right after. She sounded panicked, not her usual self. Their voices stayed low, careful not to attract Michelle's attention. Around them, the artifice of calm started crumbling. The official excuse for moving Jasmine now sounded flimsy, dissolving whenever questioned directly. The more David thought about it, the more uneasy he became. Following orders was one thing, but pretending this was all normal just felt wrong. It became clear that the way they had always understood keeping order was only holding up on the surface. Underneath, every forced smile and quiet moment had started to mean something else entirely. Complicity, not professionalism. As rumors swirled and more crew began to second-guess the decisions that brought them here, the unspoken trust in Michelle's authority began to weaken. Eyes darted around the galley and across the aisles, not with respect this time, but with uncertainty and worry. Authority, once automatic and steady, now felt uncertain, its hold fading with each unanswered question and each nervous look the attendants traded. At the Department of Transportation's main operations center in Washington, D.C., Carol's desk became the center of a whirlwind. She worked quickly, barely pausing between phone calls. Her voice was steady and commanding. She knew there was no room for gaps or wavering in this moment. The problem wasn't only about Jasmine now. It was about fairness itself, a principle Carol had spent her whole career defending. She made it clear to everyone she reached. This incident was high priority. There would be a formal investigation, and it wouldn't be slow or tucked away behind closed doors. Carol's orders flew out with precision. The airline was told to stop all moves regarding the flight, grounding it fully and guaranteeing the Passengers and crew would be available for questioning. She called in field agents from the Federal Aviation Administration and made sure civil rights specialists were added to the team. Carol checked and double-checked. She didn't want this. Treated like a box-ticking exercise. This would not be handled quietly. Every outside protocol would be followed by the book and carefully documented. Word spread fast inside the organization, from seasoned officials to the youngest staffers. The phone lines buzzed with urgent messages about the flight at Dulles International Airport. Some people were caught off guard. They were used to smaller, more local problems that could be handled with a memo or a carefully written apology. This was different. A full stop, a very public investigation. Within the airline, panic started to set in. Managers scrambled to respond, passing along orders and hushed warnings. Flight operations at the airport slowed as everyone realized the gravity of the situation. Carol pushed further, insisting each department confront the root issues. She went beyond the immediate event, pressing for a full review of first-class upgrade policies and staff training. She wanted to make sure that what happened to Jasmine wouldn't happen again, on any flight, to any passenger. Her efforts sent a strong message to the airline and to everyone watching. There would be no brushing this under the rug. Years of standard procedure and silent nods suddenly faced a real challenge. Carried on emails, phone calls, and in-person briefings, Carol's determination promised something the system rarely delivered: accountability, clear and public. For once, the cycle of silence was going to break in the open, not just behind closed doors. The plane sat motionless at the gate, while uncertainty clung to everything inside. Outside, the usual sounds of travelers rushing to departures and families waving goodbye seemed to fade, replaced by a heavy silence spreading through every row of seats. The pause stretched on, and it felt as if time inside the aircraft had slowed, drawing everyone's attention to things they had ignored just a short time ago. Gone was the comfortable hum of travel. People who once chatted about vacations, work, or the weather now found themselves lowering their voices or falling quiet altogether. Conversations drifted into silence, and it felt almost as if everyone was waiting for the next shoe to drop. There was a sense of judgment in the air, no one saying anything directly, yet everyone aware that something serious had taken place. Eyes moved from neighbor to neighbor, each person suddenly wondering what role they had played in what just happened, even if all they had done was sit in their seat and look the other way. At the front of the plane, the empty seat where Jasmine had briefly sat was now an unspoken sign of everything gone wrong. That one piece of first class that stood out, a single seat, untouched and alone, surrounded by the plushness everyone dreamed of, reminded everyone present that something important had been lost. People still sitting in business suits and well-pressed clothes fidgeted, some studying their hands, others pretending to look out the window, but it was impossible not to notice the absence at the center of it all. Jasmine's quiet resistance. Her being removed from that seat hit home for many, even if they would never admit it out loud. It was more than just an airline mishap or an uncomfortable delay. It pointed at something deep, something about how often people are too eager to move forward without stopping to consider what it costs those left behind. The scene, a college, student facing blatant bias while others watched, uncertain or indifferent, exposed a kind of emptiness it hurt to face. It made even strangers reflect on what they valued, and whether going along with things, just to keep moving, was worth that sudden feeling of regret. With every moment, the plane remained grounded. That awkward emptiness grew, refusing to be ignored. The truth hung heavy in the air, forcing everyone, crew and passengers alike, to reckon with their own parts in a moment of quiet injustice. Inside the plane, the weight felt endless. People sat upright, holding onto their armrests, not sure what would come next. No one offered any comforting words or soft explanations to smooth things over. Instead, A new announcement crackled through the speakers, this time short but unmistakably official. The message came down from Department of Transportation higher-ups. This was not something the crew could sweep aside or handle quietly. There would be no private apology whispered at the edge of the aisle or a hasty voucher handed off before takeoff. The situation called for something much bigger, and everyone sensed it. Michelle, still shaken but trying to keep up an air of professionalism, stood up at the front. For a second, she met the eyes of the rest of her crew. She could see the worry in David's face and the rising expectation everyone else carried. The captain gave her a small, sympathetic nod before turning his gaze back out the cockpit window. Taking a slow breath, Michelle stepped out into the aisle. With every step she took through the rows, there was a feeling like walking against a strong wind. Passengers watched her, some with folded arms, some not even blinking. When Michelle reached the back, she stopped beside Jasmine, who had been quietly waiting, phone resting on her lap. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Michelle, her voice steady but quieter than before, addressed Jasmine for everyone to hear. "Miss Williams, I need to apologize for the way you were treated. It was not right. I would like to invite you back to your first-class seat, if you are willing." The whole cabin seemed to hold its breath. It was not just an apology, it was a public reckoning, one that could not be softened or spun as a misunderstanding. The return walk up the aisle felt completely different from before. No one looked away. Eyes followed Michelle and Jasmine together, their passage breaking the tension just a bit, but leaving a thick layer of accountability in its place. For Michelle, each step beside Jasmine forced her to move through the consequences of her earlier actions, felt now as disapproval radiating from every seat. The silence was no longer consent. It felt more like a demand for justice, for repair. As Jasmine sat down in first class again, the unspoken message ran through the whole plane. People expected not just comfort, but real responsibility from those in charge. As Jasmine and Michelle reached the front of the plane again, everything seemed to slow down. Passengers leaned forward just a bit, waiting. Jasmine turned, looked directly at Michelle, and asked in a calm but clear voice, "Why was I the only one questioned?" She did not raise her voice or show much emotion, yet her words rang out in the still air, giving shape to what many in the cabin had been silently wondering. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the clicking of seatbelts and the shuffling of bags stopped. The question hung there, heavy and insistent. It was more than just a call for an explanation. It was a challenge to the old ways people tended to justify little acts of bias or unfairness. Michelle, who had always prided herself on being assertive and in control, stumbled for a response. The eyes of her crew and every passenger seemed to fix on her, seeing her not just as a leader, but as someone who might answer for them all. There was no good defense. Michelle's throat tightened, and for a second, she looked like she might try to brush it off with some vague explanation about policy or procedures, but she saw right, a way that would not work anymore. Her reasoning, that gut feeling which had seemed harmless and routine, now showed up for what it was, a snap judgment, one that had real consequences for Jasmine and now, in this setting, for Michelle herself. She managed a quiet, awkward apology, her voice thinner than anyone had ever heard from her before. "I am sorry. I should not have treated you differently. That was wrong." It was not triumphant or grand. In fact, the apology felt exposed and raw, falling short of the kind of dignity Michelle usually carried. Around them, the other passengers registered the moment, some with discomfort, some with relief, but all with a new awareness. It was clear now that a simple hunch or a harmless assumption could shatter someone's dignity and ruin years of trust in only a few seconds. No one was eager to fill the silence. Even the crew members looked shaken, understanding that what had been handled by habit in the past could no longer pass unspoken or unchallenged. The cabin seemed transformed into a silent courtroom. Every sigh, every nervous cough, and every sideways glance became part of this public shift, as people finally faced how old habits no longer held up. Jasmine made her way back to her original seat in first class, but the atmosphere in the cabin was completely different this time. There were no cheers, no supportive smiles or friendly pats on the back. People watched her quietly as she passed, and the silence was heavy, thick with something deeper than embarrassment. It was as if everyone on board was faced with the reflection of their own inaction, and for once, nobody could look away or offer excuses. The awkwardness wasn't about Jasmine anymore, it was about all of them. When she sat down, Jasmine let her hands rest on her lap, feeling the soft fabric of her seat. It should have been comfortable, even a little rewarding, but it only reminded her how far things still had to go. She could sense the attention, not open or hostile, but full of a different kind of energy. People shifting in their seats, glancing over and then quickly looking away, some murmuring quiet words to each other, unsure if they should say something out loud or if silence was safest. No one handed out any words of encouragement. Instead, the quiet itself felt like a lesson everyone had taken in together. Jasmine was just a college student, someone used to fighting for her spot, but she realized all at once that what she did mattered to all these strangers too. She hadn't raised her voice or kicked up a scene. She had simply asked a fair question and refused to slip back into the background. That calm resistance had done something bigger than making someone apologize. It had shifted the weight of responsibility off her shoulders alone and forced it onto everyone else. As she settled in, she noticed a change. The flight attendants moved a little slower, more aware of their actions. Their professionalism now felt touched by genuine thoughtfulness rather than routine. Fellow passengers who had kept quiet before now avoided eye contact, their faces showing genuine discomfort and the beginnings of understanding. Whispered conversations flickered up and down the aisle, not mocking or dismissive, but questioning. Honest, sometimes even uneasy. Jasmine felt it too, the burden of being the one to stand up, knowing she had made injustice visible for everyone on board. Still, she also felt hope, sensing that maybe the smallest acts of standing your ground can push others to reflect and change, even if all you get in return is a hush filled with meaning. The cabin crew was still unsettled, their nerves on edge, after everything that had just unfolded. The moment Jasmine retook her seat, another alert buzzed on Michelle's work phone. She glanced down and saw a notice from the Department of Transportation. Their agents were arriving at the gate and would be taking full control of the investigation. The instructions were clear. Every flight attendant, pilot, and even ground staff would be required to share exactly what they had seen and done. The crew exchanged hurried glances. It was no longer about saving face for the airline or smothering the incident with polite words. There was now a need for real repair, for truth and acknowledgement, not just damage control. Michelle felt the weight of this shift press in around her. For years, protecting the airline's reputation was second nature. Dealing with complaints quietly, smoothing things over for passengers, and moving on as if nothing had happened was part of the routine. But as she stood near the galley reading her orders, the old playbook finally seemed useless. The public apology, the questioning from Jasmine, and the reaction of the passengers had already started to undo everything she took for granted about her authority. Now, with the arrival of government investigators, Michelle understood that the story wasn't hers to contain anymore. At the back of the cabin, David watched Michelle, his eyes harder than before. His disappointment was obvious. It was no longer just confusion or shock at her actions, but genuine letdown at seeing someone he had always respected miss the mark. They had faced plenty of tricky moments together during flights, weather emergencies, angry customers, unexpected delays, but nothing that exposed their values in front of so many people quite like this. As more agents in navy blue jackets began boarding, the finality of what was coming hit Michelle in waves. Even small automatic decisions could come with big, lasting consequences. Other crew members glanced around uncertainly, bracing themselves for questions none of them wanted to answer but knew they could not avoid. The rigid certainty that once attached to every rule and habit was gone, replaced by unsettled faces and a handful of tough, honest self-reflection. It was clear. Now everybody, not just Michelle, would need to show what they really stood for. The usual comfort of procedures had been replaced by the reality that this time, accountability mattered more than routine, and nothing would be swept under the rug. The arrival of the federal agents brought an entirely new atmosphere to the cabin. When the agents in sharp suits stepped through the entrance, everything seemed to pause. Passengers sat up a little straighter, their conversations dropping off to quiet whispers or stopping altogether. Nobody felt bold enough to ask questions or complain about the delay anymore. There was a definite sense that something important was happening, something that would not be brushed aside or forgotten as soon as the aircraft doors finally closed. The agents moved efficiently, their eyes taking in every detail, making quiet notes. Some passengers tried to look busy with their phones or gaze out the window, but there was no ignoring what this meant. Even the flight crew stood back respectfully. The silent judgment that had filled the cabin before was replaced with an official process, one that carried weight and real consequences. From now on, it would not be up to individuals to decide what mattered or how things would be handled. There was a system, and the system was now in motion, with everyone aware that this moment would settle into a permanent memory for all involved. When Michelle was called up by name, she knew there was no way to prepare herself for what came next. The walk from the front to the agents felt like it took ages, though it was really just a short distance. Every step echoed in the hush of the cabin, watched by rows of witnesses who had already seen her at her best and worst that day. She straightened, her shoulders trying to keep her composure, but the embarrassment and regret weighed on her heavily. There were no dramatic actions, no handcuffs, no shouting or pushing. Instead, Michelle just felt exposed, painfully aware that she would have to answer for choices that had once seemed routine, but had now become the central focus of an official investigation. What was just another flight hours before had turned into a lesson about what happens when instinct goes unchecked and how easily habits can lead to real harm. Now, with her name being logged and her statement to be taken in front of everyone, Michelle felt the difference between private guilt and public responsibility. The memory of this moment, her long walk, the eyes upon her, and the presence of those waiting to record every word became stamped on the collective mind of the cabin, impossible to erase or ignore. As soon as Michelle was escorted off the plane by the federal agents, something essential shifted in the air. There was no outburst or loud conversation, just a collective sense of acceptance that things would never be the same, at least not for anyone on board that afternoon. The absence of noise was not empty. It seemed thick with new realizations and questions weighing on everyone. No one cheered as Michelle passed, and there was nothing like outrage or satisfaction written on anyone's face. Instead, the overwhelming feeling was one of honest reflection, like each person was quietly unpacking what the day's events meant for them personally. People gathered their belongings and stood up as the plane prepared to empty, but the usual rush to exit or the chatter about connections was missing. Most glanced around at their fellow travelers, wondering about the roles they themselves had played. Was staying silent an act of politeness or just a way of ignoring something that should never have happened? For many, it was the first time they considered that doing nothing might have made them part of the problem. Through all of this, Jasmine sat tall in her seat, her expression calm. It was not the face of someone who felt victorious. It was the quiet comfort of knowing that her dignity and worth could not be taken from her, not by the system, and not by any individual. She did not stare anyone down or expect apologies from every side. She understood that her resistance was never just about herself. Without raising her voice, she had set an example, showing that facing down casual injustice was worth it, even if all it brought was a slow shift in awareness. Every passenger moved toward the jet bridge changed, each in their own way. Some felt embarrassed, replaying moments when they could have spoken up or even just offered support. Others just silently absorbed the lesson. The awkwardness lingered, but underneath was the start of something hopeful, a sense that responsibility for fairness, respect, and decency belonged to everyone, not just those who experience injustice directly. By the time the last backpacks and coats had disappeared through the door, the experience stayed with them. Leaving the plane, every person carried away the silent lesson, the discomfort, and maybe the promise to be a little braver next time. When Jasmine finally stepped off the plane, the weight of the afternoon hung on her shoulders, but felt lighter with every step down the jet bridge. Waiting at the entrance to the terminal was her friend, Maria, who had been tracking the updates on her phone and pacing anxiously near the arrival gate. Maria greeted Jasmine quietly, her pride showing in her steady eyes and the gentle squeeze of her hand on Jasmine's shoulder. There was no need for big speeches or dramatic reactions between them. They both understood exactly what had happened and how much it mattered. They walked together down the wide corridors of John F. Kennedy Airport, a familiar place that somehow felt different now. All around, travelers wheeled suitcases and checked their phones, but a few cast curious looks in their direction, sensing that something important had just taken place. Jasmine and Maria shared a small, knowing smile. It was not about drawing attention, it was the relief of being seen for who they really were. Strong, determined, and unwilling to be silent in the face of unfairness. Jasmine felt supported in a way she had not expected. Maria's quiet strength beside her was all she needed. Their bond, built on years of friendship and countless moments of backing each other up, meant Jasmine never really felt alone. Sometimes, solidarity looked simple, like a companion waiting past the arrivals barrier, but that little gesture carried more meaning than all the whispered conversations on the plane. As they made their way past coffee stands and shops, Jasmine noticed that the vastness of the airport no longer made her feel small or isolated. For the first time, she walked through the busy terminal with her head high, the echoes of uncertainty replaced by a deep sense of belonging. Other passengers passing by picked up on the shift too. No one dared to minimize her presence or question her right to be exactly where she was. Their journey home was no longer just about a personal victory. What Jasmine had faced inside that airplane had become something larger, the start of a change that would ripple beyond that one flight. She could sense the beginnings of an institutional shift, a sense that what happened on board would bring real consequences, new standards, maybe even new training for the staff. As Jasmine and Maria disappeared into the thrum of the airport, their simple show of unity left a story behind, one that would be told and retold, reminding everyone that quiet courage and true support can reach much further than anyone imagines. The fallout from the flight was felt almost immediately. At the headquarters of the airline, United Skies, emergency meetings took place around the clock. Executives, public relations officers, and legal teams gathered in glass-walled conference rooms, all aware that they had a major crisis on their hands. The directives given from the very top were firm. They had to dig into what went wrong, hold people accountable, and make sure changes happened quickly. The first step was decisive. The dismissal of Michelle, the chief flight attendant, whose actions had started the entire incident. As news of her termination broke, the airline pushed forward with sweeping changes. They began rolling out new policies that had never existed before. There was a rush to update training programs and put in place regular workshops for staff, not just once, but several times a year. Updated protocols were introduced to make sure that every complaint, no matter how small, would be checked up on, and new channels for reporting issues were opened up to protect both passengers and employees who spoke up when something was wrong. The rules were easy to find and understand, and emphasis was put on making all customers feel safe and respected. Jasmine's story spread far and wide, quickly becoming more than just airline news. Social media, newspapers, and talk shows across the United States picked up on what she had done. Within United Skies, the changes went so deep that entire sections of the operating manual now carried clauses inspired by her actions, with her name referenced as part of a new standard for fair treatment. Videos and training exercises included detailed accounts of what had happened, using Jasmine's quiet defiance as a positive example for the entire staff to learn from. The company hosted open meetings and listening sessions, inviting frequent travelers, activists, and employees to share their thoughts. The public demanded transparency every step of the way. As the days went by, the incident was no longer treated as a rare mistake. It was held up as a turning point and used to remind everyone how important it was to respond with both accountability and compassion. Jasmine's brave choice had changed more than her own flight. It changed the very way an entire company and soon other airlines would protect passengers in the future. In just a short time, what started as a quiet act of resistance was turned into a clear call for lasting, widespread justice. Even as news of the incident reached every corner of the country and Jasmine's name was included in headlines and hashtags, she chose not to step into the spotlight. She gently turned down every request for interviews from morning shows and major newspapers. She ignored offers for photo shoots, speaking engagements, and public awards. Whenever someone tried to reach out to her for an exclusive or to ask her to be the face of a movement, Jasmine replied with a polite but firm no. It was not that she was shy, but she truly believed this was not about fame or being seen as a hero. Her quiet refusal set her apart. Jasmine wanted to make things better, not for recognition, but so that no other young woman would have to go through the kind of hurt she had felt, so that what happened on that flight would never slip into being. Just another invisible pain. That private choice to keep her head down and live her everyday life gave even more power to what she had done. People talked about her all over the country, in big cities and tiny towns, inspired by the idea that courage does not have to be loud to make a difference. Jasmine's actions became a topic in all kinds of places, like classrooms where teachers used her story as a way of asking students to think about responsibility and fairness, or at staff trainings in offices where employees practiced what they would do if they ever saw someone being treated unfairly. Her experience was also shared at national conferences, where speakers pointed to her as a real-life reminder that even one person taking a stand could ripple out further than they ever expected. Across coffee shops, church basements, and after-school clubs, the same questions kept being asked. When is it enough to stay quiet? And if I saw something wrong, would I have the strength to say something? Jasmine never needed to answer those questions out loud. Instead, her story, spoken about by others, never by herself, served as a nudge, reminding everyone that silence can sometimes be the heaviest choice a person makes. In the end, Jasmine's influence only grew precisely because she did not chase the limelight. With each retelling, more people wondered if, next time they came face to face with injustice, maybe they would finally break their own silence too.